All righty, good morning. Greetings everyone and welcome to the latest installment of the Active Transportation Resource Center, ATRC, webinar series. I'm your facilitator today. My name is Victoria Custodio, and today's webinar is entitled Safe Routes to School Evaluation Resources and Best Practices. As our announcement for this webinar described, this webinar will highlight key Safe Routes to School evaluation tools and resources from the National Center for Safe Routes to School, who has long been a leader in evaluation design and practice. All of these tools are aimed to help you assess the impact of your Safe Routes to School efforts on the school commute. In addition, we'll feature how one California jurisdiction is applying these and other evaluation tools for important prioritization and planning purposes. Next slide. Okay, and as a reminder, for those of you who have not yet attended one of our webinars, this webinar is being hosted by the Caltrans Active Transportation Resource Center, which is funded through the California Active Transportation Program. The ATRC provides resources utilizing a combination of subject matter experts from Caltrans, the California Department of Public Health, California State University Sacramento, CSUS, and various other non-infrastructure, safe routes to school, and infrastructure experts. We also exist to support Caltrans Active Transportation Program awardees at the local and regional level, but we also provide additional technical assistance and support to those that are just getting started and not yet awardees. Next slide, please. All right. Before we begin, we have a little bit of housekeeping. Please use your phone for the audio for this webinar. Hopefully everyone can hear us, and if you have any concerns, you can always use the chat feature on the in the WebEx box in order to let us know that you're having difficulties, and we'll do our best to help you. We have muted all of your phones. Everyone is in listen-only mode. And again, if you have any difficulties, please click Contact Support link in the calendar invitation for this webinar, and we'll do our best to provide you with any assistance you might need. Next slide. This webinar will be recorded and posted to the ATRC website, and that's www.caatpresources.org. Questions and answers are strongly encouraged, and we'll be using the chat feature. Enter questions into the chat feature at any time. We're going to give each speaker a chance to answer one or two questions that come in after his or her presentation, but we'll have a much more robust question and answer period after all presentations have been completed. All right, next slide. Okay, and we've got a few objectives for this webinar. By the end of this webinar, participants will be able to identify resources and tools for Safe Routes to School evaluation, and then they should also be able to provide examples of how Safe Routes to School evaluation data can be used and leveraged to support larger active transportation and bicycle and pedestrian safety initiatives, including initiatives like Vision Zero. Next slide. We've lined up two wonderful speakers today. First, we'll have Seth Lajeunesse, who is the Associate Director of the National Center for Safe Routes to School and a Research Associate with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. He studies trends related to walking and cycling, as well as social and political dynamics of road safety initiatives. Seth's a member of the American Evaluation Association, the American Public Health Association, and the Pedestrians Committee of the Transportation Research Board, TRB, is how we usually refer to it. He previously worked as a school psychologist and holds master's degrees in child psychology as well as city and regional planning. And then after Seth, we're going to hear from Anna Volitsik, who is the director of the Safe Routes to School program in San Francisco. She manages several active transportation and traffic safety programs at the San Francisco Department of Public Health, and she's been doing that since 2002. She also coordinates various educational programs and encouragement activities focused on safe and active walking and bicycling, including Vision Zero and Safe Streets for Seniors. She's received her master's in public health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And again, my name is Victoria Custodio, and I'm one of a number of regional technical assistance coordinators at the Active Transportation Resource Center. All right. And before our first presentation, we just wanted to have, get a sense of who's on the webinar with us today. So we've got 3 poll questions. So if you could use your polling feature and answer the first question, which is your best response about your current Safer to School evaluation practice. Are you just getting started? Do you have a system in place but are considering ways to change or develop your practice? Or you kind of fit it into that other category? We'll just take a minute to get all of the responses set. All right. I think that's everyone. And so I'm seeing, okay, that about a quarter of you are just getting started, and a quarter of you have a system in place. And then we've got others who are fall into the other category and aren't responding at this point. All right, so hopefully that'll help our presenters and in their planning. Let's go to the next poll question. Okay, and our second poll question is about your familiarity with the Safe Routes to School evaluation resources from the National Center. So these are your 2 choices, that you've used the evaluation resources or you've not yet used them. Is that a 4? I am having. Okay, perfect. Yes. All right. So I believe I think we've got most of the responses back. We have about 50% of attendees that have not yet used the National Center for Safe Routes to School evaluation resources. So hopefully that's helpful. And let's move on to the last poll question. Thank you for everyone for participating. This really helps us figure out who our audience is today. Okay. All right, and our final one is, okay. And our final one is, let's open the poll, is please select the best response to describe your program. Is your program part of a larger active transportation safety program and evaluation effort? Or is it kind of right now a standalone program? All right, we're going to give it, so you can answer quickly, it'll settle itself. Okay, so for the responses, we have about, I wish it was percentages of. So I'm seeing 14 out of 34 are saying it's part of a larger, their Safe Routes to School program is part of a larger active transportation safety program and evaluation effort. I think I will leave it at that. All right. So on that note, we would like to, I think we're ready for our first presentation. So Seth, if you could unmute your phone.
Okay.
All right, Seth, I think take it away, please.
Take it away. All right. Thanks, Victoria. And thanks, everybody. Good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for sacrificing your Friday morning to spend time with us to talk about some evaluation tools. Those poll questions were great because, as Victoria was saying, you have a general sense of who we're talking to and, kind of level of experience with this. It sounds like some of you have experience using some of the tools that we offer at the National Center and some do not. So I hope that this will be useful to everybody. I certainly hope that's the case. And please, feel free to chat and tell me how poorly I'm doing if that is not the case. I guess we can go to the next slide. So what I wanted to talk about today with you guys, basically have a brief history and an overview of the data system, just provide that, a little bit of context, talk about where this all came from, and then go into a little more specifics and detail about the data collection forms that we have, and then what we've learned from people at all levels of government and community, how they've used it and how they've benefited from using some of the tools that we have at the National Center. Next slide, please. So the brief scoop on the data system is that it was developed in early 2007. So as just another bit of background, the National Center for Safe Routes to School was created as part of Safe Delivery Transportation legislation, and we were established at the UNC Highway Safety Research Center in October of 2006. So relatively quickly, the staff here at the time, I was not actually with the center at that point, put together some forms, that is the parent survey and the student travel tally, with the idea that there would be standard and central system for people to use it, so that different states could use it and then maybe benchmark against each other. Locals could do the same, and then we could start getting a national picture too about what's going on. And so the website to the data system itself is saferoutesdata.org, just for your reference there. Next slide, please. So the data collection forms, on the left there you see the parent survey, and then on the right you have the travel tally. Both of these forms are available at that website, saferoutesdata.org. Next slide, please. And you'll see that there are also other language options. And this is the gracious activity of partners around the country that have actually taken initiative to translate the survey into these different languages. So we've had absolutely nothing to do with this. In fact, they were very open and shared this with everybody, made it useful for a number of people in places where English is probably not the primary language, in a lot of places. Next slide, please. So just considerations about the forms themselves. The parent survey is really telling two things. One is how the children whose parents respond to the survey, how do they get to school on most days? That is on the form itself, on most days. And it's also perceptions about what parents think about walking and cycling to school. How much fun is it? How healthy? Does the school support walking and cycling? And the one caveat, well, it's not really a caveat, but basically it's less sensitive to change. So if you're out there evaluating program impacts and you use a parent survey, it's great to get a general sense of how parents think about active transportation. But what you'll see is that it's a little less sensitive to change because it's tapping into that typical school commute. The student travel tallies, on the other hand, give us a sense of a few days during a week, so the week that you do the tally itself. And because kids' travel patterns change pretty strikingly, rapidly and consistently, these are more sensitive to change. So what you'll see if you use the tally around, say, walk to school day, for instance, you'll probably see a spike in walking to school right around that time frame. In fact, we've seen spikes 3-4 weeks out after walk to school day. So it's nice to see that kind of impact that it can have over time. Next slide, please. Some other considerations are that when you go to saferoutesdata.org and you want to send out parent survey links or student travel tally links, you can do so now. You can go in and establish the time you'd like the window, the surveying or tallying window to be open. You can go there and collect those and then share those links with parents or teachers. You could also download the paper forms. Of course, the caveat there is that when you get the paper form responses back, we no longer have the ability to process those data for you. As of the end of 2016, we lost that ability given our arrangement with FHWA. So this is just some considerations about what essentially it takes, to develop that time budget if you're using paper forms. It takes about a minute to enter once you get the form back, parent survey, and then travel tallies take about 30 seconds to enter. And then also sometimes the rough estimates for how long it takes parents to complete and teachers to complete the forms. Next slide, please. So the system, as of actually last week, maintains 1.5 million parent surveys and 350,000 travel tallies. And travel tallies are at the classroom level, so that's essentially information from 350,000 classrooms. In over 15,000 schools, in over 3,000 cities, and in all states and D.C. But what it also has for state coordinators, or those people working with state coordinators who have access to this, there are 6,700 state-funded state process school projects in there. Basically, information about how much was spent on the project, what sort of project it is it infrastructure, non-infrastructure, some description about what it was, and the schools that it impacted. Next slide, please. So just briefly, especially for those not familiar with Safe Routes data, there are different levels of users. So the top user, because under our contract with FHWA, we established that the state DOTs actually own the data system. The state coordinators are the top level across. So you have a state coordinator in California who has access to all schools in California and could decide who also joins the team, adding projects to the data or to the database as well. And then it goes down to administrators. These are basically people that arrived first and started entering schools' data, started developing school groups. These are people that can edit, remove, and add people to have access to the data for whatever they have jurisdiction over. Say it's a school district, they can decide who is their co-pilot, if you will. And then it goes down to edit data, run reports. Basically, you can, if you're an administrator, you can just assign certain levels of access to people, how much you want them to be able to play around with the data. And running reports is good for if you have people that are just interested in the reporting side. So the nice reports that you can develop after you've inputted the parent surveys and the student travel tabs. But the last one is basically anybody can go on saferoutesdata.org right now, set up an account, and just start looking around, basically seeing to the level of what school, did a school collect data, and when did they collect the data? And that's it. They can't make any changes. They can't view anything else, just seeing whether or not they collected it. Next slide, please. So if you are interested, I do encourage you to visit the Navigating the Data System resource. It's an 8-page PDF that basically lays out objectives that most people try to achieve when they go in inputting data and reporting data, and provides step-by-step instructions for doing any number of things you wish to do. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to get into sort of the different levels of benefits that we've been, about using the system that we've heard from users themselves. Next slide, please. Right now you can document what happened at a school and when. And this is by assigning something we call tags. You can assign a tag to a specific time frame, just as you see here. October 2015 is when the walk-in school bus started at Enforcement Elementary, a whimsically named school. You can do this. The tags at the time frame level are basically meant to be record keeping, but also can show you the impact of different interventions. Next slide, please. And then you can see with the reporting side, we have the ability to look at travel tallies that are collected at the same school, 2 time periods. You can compare 2 time periods to each other to see whether or not walking and cycling to school shifted the way that you'd like it to, or what happened with busing in family vehicle as well. You can see basically how the school commute has shifted over time, and if your program is having an impact. Next slide, please. Then you can dive in to schools, one school's data. Next slide. And see what's inside, basically. If you just have an interest in what days the tally were collected, what was kind of the weather that the teacher reported, you can look kind of a deep dive at an individual tally, an individual classroom. Next slide, please. So some regional benefits. Next slide, please. The really nice thing about the way it's structured now is that you can arrange schools into school groups. Like I have here, we have 3 schools in 2 different cities, and arranged in the school group for the National Center, as you see there. These are all, of course, fake. But I'll show you what this means when you're kind of trying to benchmark or compare schools to each other or to a larger group. Next slide, please. What you can do is you compare a town or city to the larger group, like I was just saying. So Pittsboro, next slide, please. Looking at relative to the larger National Center group. So Pittsboro, the 2 schools there versus the 3 schools in the larger group. You see that in Pittsboro, there's more walking going on and less busing than you do in the larger group at large. So it's good use to sort of benchmark against a larger group. Next slide, please. Or if you really want to, and certainly we've heard many cases of people doing their own data analysis, you can download a CSV file by exporting the data. So you can see Horton Who Elementary, November 2016, you can get that raw data right there in a CSV file, and then create your own data set. Next slide, please. So one of the things, I can talk about the system, right, and certainly I'm biased about it, help manage it and everything. One of the things we did was reach out to people who used it for a while, and particularly at a regional level, not unlike many of you. What we found when in doing these kind of exploratory interviews with them was that a lot of them described this kind of elimination of the need to design their own evaluation forms. So a lot of times, putting together questionnaires, interview protocols, that could be really time-consuming. And also the data collection processes, how you distribute, but also how do you collect data and process that. And so what that does to eliminate the need to do that, it allows the program organizers to spend more time doing what they should be doing, right, designing and implementing programs. And then some ancillary benefits as well is that once you have the reports back, there is this kind of social political capital that we had heard about. People bringing the reports to meetings, different stakeholder meetings, and just kind of having conversation based upon the findings. And then also, when seeking grant funding especially, that seemed to pop up quite a bit when people actually had results, right? They knew what the baseline walking and cycling patterns were at different schools, and they were able to leverage those to get funding. Next slide, please. So the within and between state benefits, this is something we've seen, again, over the years. Next slide, please. First, within a state, the state coordinator, as I mentioned before, can go into stateprops.data.org and input different projects, where it was funded, from where it was funded and what year. You can look at infrastructure versus non-infrastructure, those that are combined. Many of the projects that no doubt you work on are combining these things and more comprehensive. So the state can put this in there and then also get summaries back about the kind of project and funding activity in the state. Next slide, please. And another example within state is, we work with our state coordinators really closely, and this is something we had done with the Tennessee coordinator, was aggregating everything in Tennessee and looking at some of the more commonly reported issues that parents were reporting about disallowing their children to watch school. So give some good feedback about what are kind of the critical pieces and concerns in their state. Next slide, please. And we've seen this pooled fund study in 5 states. It's a remarkable study out of Florida, Mississippi, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin, where they pulled the data together and they looked at what had changed over this 5-year period. And they had seen a 45% increase in walking and 24% increase in biking. And they directly attributed to the programming that was going on in these states. It was also a way for them to benchmark against each other. Next slide, please. So national benefits. Next slide, please. So Noreen McDonald, many of you might know her work. She's here at UNC, and she had looked at what we understand to be at least the most comprehensive kind of travel mode study to school that we've seen yet. Looked at 801 schools over 5 years and saw these increases after the different programming efforts. And what I failed to include here actually was that with a combined effort, a more comprehensive approach, they saw a 31% increase on average in walking and biking. Next slide, please. And then what we're able to do at the National Center, this comes from the last trends report we had put together, looking at a really large sample, 6,500 schools, and their patterns about how they got home from school, their departure, also what impact that weather seemed to have. You see that spike in the summer months, and then winter it seemed like it depressed a bit. And then this parent perceived school support or encouragement of walking and cycling, we saw a spike in that more recently as well. So we're able to monitor and look at these trends on a more national level as well. Next slide, please. So I guess the takeaways for many of you, and certainly people that have used this system before too, just some considerations, are to think about the current and potential data collecting schools and really trying to think about how they should be organized. And what our recommendation is that you organize the schools in the largest sensible group. So if you're working at an MPO or for a county, certainly think about that size. Because what you can do is subdivide those schools within that larger group using tags at the school level. You can use a tag that describes what city the school is in, or something else, what side of the city, the east side, the west side. And then thinking about who you really trust, of course, you don't want just anybody in there, right? Who you want your kind of data collection and reporting co-pilots to be. So if you're setting up something, you're the administrator, you can decide to have co-administrators if you wanted to. And these are people that could also give other people access as well. But decide who those co-pilots are. And then how much time you have to devote to collecting and entering. I had given you before the estimates are how long it takes to input a parent survey or a student travel tally. Those are just for your information, just to let you know that this is how it can be somewhat time consuming if you're using paper, but also know the audience about, are you going to do an online parent survey or an online tally? And then how and with whom to share data reports. A lot of times what we see is that people put lots of data into the system, we don't have a lot of evidence for sometimes where they download the reports and actually get feedback, the results. So really being thoughtful about how you would share it and what kind of vein you would do that, and then with whom you would share the data reports. Last slide, please. With that, I thank you again for taking your morning hours out to listen to me drone on about the data system. But if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact me. Or if you have more general questions about data, the data system, or you just simply don't want to talk to me in particular, you can always email the data system as well. So thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Victoria.
Thank you, Seth. That was great. So comprehensive, and we really appreciate the presentation. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box at this time. I want to encourage all of our participants to use the chat box for questions. And at this point, we're going to shift gears and have our second presenter, who is Anna Volicic from San Francisco Department of Public Health.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you, Seth. So I'm here to describe how we use the tools that Seth has outlined and how we apply it here in our Safe Routes to School program in San Francisco. Next slide, please. To just give you a presentation overview, I'm going to describe our school commute study that we have here in San Francisco, how we use those results to inform Safe Routes to School, and how we created a prioritization system for our school district to look at both infrastructure and non-infrastructure in Safe Routes to School. Next slide, please. So just a little background on San Francisco. We are a very unique place in many ways, but San Francisco is 49 square miles on a tip of a peninsula, so it's actually relatively small compared to other jurisdictions. But we have 750,000 people that live within this area, so it's very dense. And we also have the unique feature that we are one city, one county, and we have one school district. So it has its pros and cons. It is, there's an opportunity to streamline communications because we are only dealing with one school district, but it's obviously pretty big. It has 74 elementary schools, 13 middle, and 15 high schools. So we are facing a multitude of challenges within the city, as you can imagine, including traffic volumes, traffic speeds, areas that are experiencing some violence, and just the sheer number of schools that we're dealing with within the district. Next slide, please. So school assignment in San Francisco, which determines has a big impact on transportation. It is a choice system in San Francisco. It is not a neighborhood assignment system. So it's actually called a blended choice system. So families can apply to up to 10 schools all over the city, and they can be assigned to schools based on the choices that the family lists. But if there is a school that is oversubscribed with applications, there are tiebreakers, and as you can see from the list here. The fourth tiebreaker is an attendance area that has been drawn around the school. This system was set up in 2010, and so this is the first time in a few decades that they had put back in some kind of geographic area for a tiebreaker. But the unintended consequence is that we have some students that can live miles away from the school that they are attending. So when this assignment system happened, we partnered with UC Berkeley to do a regular school commute study to evaluate this, not only this assignment system, but our program. Next slide, please. This is a map of the Unified School District in San Francisco, and as you can see, there are lots of red lines drawn. These are the attendance areas around the elementary schools in the school district, just so you can see as an example. Next slide, please. So our school commute study uses the travel tally from the National Center for Safe Routes to School. We partnered with UC Berkeley to conduct this. We chose sample grades in all of the elementary, middle, and high schools. So we are using data from kindergarten and 5th grade to represent elementary, 6th grade to represent middle, and 9th grade to represent high school. We in the Safe Routes to School program actually do the travel tally in all the grades in all participating schools, and we have cross-referenced our data to the data that UC Berkeley collects and helps to supplement, and it is very similar. So we feel confident that these sample grades reflect the travel patterns that are happening in the schools. And we have done this annually since the student assignment system was redesigned in 2010. Next slide, please. So these are the most recent results for our elementary school. We have 73 schools reporting, and as you can see, we have about a quarter of the student body that is walking. We have low percentages of the school bus because that had been eventually eliminated or redesigned and significantly reduced in the school district. So the large proportion of those are actually special ed students, which are legally mandated. And as you can see, about half of our population is single-family vehicle. And so these are the results for elementary. Next slide, please. Even though we do have our student assignment system, we still have a significant opportunity to increase walking and biking, because if you look at where the students live compared to the school they're assigned to, we do have 25% of the students that live within a half a mile of the school, and then another 19, so that's a total of 44% that live within a mile of the school. So that we still can work on getting our rates of walking and biking to increase. We are, of course, at the Health Department, we are very concerned about equity, and we look at free and reduced lunch as an equity measure for our program. And you can see here that for every 10% increase in free and reduced lunch, walking and public transit increases. So this tells us that these families may not necessarily be able to afford a car, may not even be able to afford a bike, and it is our responsibility to make sure that the environments are safe for these families that are walking and taking transit for these vulnerable populations. Next, please. This is our results for middle and high school. You can see there are major shifts in the transportation mode here. Walking and biking is significantly decreased, which I'll explain in a minute. But public transit increases dramatically. You can see for 6th grade, it's 28%, and in 9th grade, it's over half. And we also promote this as well because you do have to either walk or bike or roll to actually get on the city bus or the train. So this is very significant for us as well. Single-family vehicle starts to dip under the halfway mark, and you can see even in the 9th grade, it's only a third of families. And this is where students are probably traveling on their own in the city. Next slide, please. One of the reasons why walking and biking decreases is that the schools start to concentrate the number of students. So we only have 13 middle schools, and there's a significant distance from home to school. It grows to about 2 miles, and it increases even further for high school, where it's 2.79 miles. But again, we are really focused on promoting the connection between home and public transit and how to get from your home safely to the public transit stop and to school. Next slide, please. So what do we do with all this data that we collect? We want to make sure that we use this data, that it is not simply just put on a shelf. So there's a number of ways that we use this. There is a discussion about another redesign of the student assignment system for various reasons. So this data can serve as a significant baseline data for that opportunity. They are talking about, the Board of Ed is in discussion right now about redesigning the student assignment system for school year 18-19, and they're starting that effort this summer. We also want to evaluate the efforts of the student assignment policies and all of our programming that we institute throughout the city, and allows the school district and our transportation department here in the city to determine which schools need programming and which schools need improvements to the streets and sidewalks. I do have to say that my screen, oh, there it goes. Next slide, please. Basically, this data allows us to allow our program and the city's efforts to be data-driven. It's not about the squeaky wheel who is getting the grease, because some of the most underserved schools don't have the capacity to be reaching out to the city, and we are using this data to fill that gap and fill that need. So we use those results from the UC Berkeley Commute Study. We created a prioritization system. It's not a very sexy title, but that's what we call it. And it's based on an article from the National Center from Safe Routes to School. I actually sent it to a copy to our hosts, who will give it out as a resource at the end of the webinar. And then we in the program here, that article is focused on prioritizing schools within a school district for improvements, capital improvements, but we've modified it a little bit to fit our non-infrastructure needs. Next slide, please. So these are all the variables that we have in our prioritization system. We include demographic data, and again, we include percentages of free and reduced lunch as a way to measure equity. And we include the walk mode share from the travel tallies per the advice of the ITE article. Next slide, please. We also, of course, want to tie this to safety. We want to put the safe in Safe Routes to School. So this is the tie to the Vision Zero initiative that is happening both in San Francisco and nationwide. We want to focus on how children's safety efforts can propel safety for all. So we include all the traffic history, collision history data that we have. In California, we are fortunate enough to have a system compiled statewide called the Statewide Integrated Traffic Records System, or SWITRS, and it collects all of this data for all of the jurisdictions in San Francisco. So we use PED collisions that happen with 800 feet buffer of a school to prioritize schools, and this helps complement the travel tally, because that actually only measures mode shift. Obviously, it doesn't incorporate a safety measure. Next slide, please. So I'll show you examples of our prioritization system in a minute, but basically, based on the article, for capital improvements, we look at schools that have high rates of walking and high numbers of pedestrian collisions, and those schools should be prioritized first for improvements. It's basically working with the lowest hanging fruit. If you have a school that has really high rates of walking, we have to make it safe for them as soon as possible. But for our non-infrastructure programming, we really want to look at schools that have lower numbers or lower rates of walkers, but still have a walk shed, or a majority of students that live within, we use 1 mile as a marker, and so that we have the opportunity to increase walking and biking. Next slide, please. So this is what, we put this in Excel. This is what our infrastructure prioritization is for elementary schools. We also have this for middle and high schools. We actually have 73 elementary schools. So this is just the first page. We broke it out into tiers. The 3 highlighted, yellow highlighted columns are what we prioritize the schools on. So you can see free and reduced lunch as an equity measure, the walk mode share of each school, and the pedestrian involved collisions. So we get a certain list of schools that we want to work with first in improving the streets and sidewalks. So you can see number 1 is listed as Gene Parker Elementary School. For those that are familiar with San Francisco, this is at the foot of the Broadway Tunnel, and there's high rates of speed that go right past the school as drivers go in and out of this tunnel. And most of these schools are located near high-speed arterial corridors and are listed in our Vision Zero High Injury Network. Next slide, please. This is how we prioritize our non-infrastructure schools. So again, this is elementary, but we have the same for middle and high school, and we have a different list of schools, as you can see. So we are prioritizing basically how many students live within a mile and with their families, and lower rates of walking, but we still want to include an equity measure, and you can see we have a totally different list of schools that are located, and so there is some overlap, as you can see. Bessie Carmichael is an example. Next slide, please. And this is our partner at the school district. He's the Director of Sustainability, and he always uses the data that we collect to help prioritize efforts within the school district. And it's just been a really wonderful partnership, and that's the value of the health department and Safe Routes to School, and that we can able to bring a data-driven approach in working in Safe Routes to School in multiple ways, not just infrastructure, but for programming as well. Next slide, please. And that's the end of my presentation, and I'm very happy to answer any questions. And this is my contact information, and I'd like to turn it back over to Victoria. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Anna. Thank you so much. And we actually have a few questions. So I'd like to actually invite both Anna and Seth to unmute their phones right now. But Anna, I'll give this first question to you. Is your 1 mile measurement for walkability a circle, or does it consider routes of travel?
It is basically a circle because we haven't been able to document all the routes of travel that all the various families that each school takes, so it is a circle.
Right. Okay. Good. Hopefully that answers that individual's question. And I know that you did use that term walkshed, which is a great term. And we do know of some states that are looking a little closer at travel routes in a kind of less set shape, which is something that we can look into at the Active Transportation Resource Center to see if that's something that we can share with the field eventually. I have a question here for Seth, and this is a little bit based on some previous dialogue we had in terms of preparing for this webinar. Seth, can you speak briefly about some of the work that's happening at the National Center with regards to integrating Safe Routes to School and Vision Zero?
I have to do that briefly?
Oh, right.
Oh no, I'm just joking. No, we've had the fortune, of course, the National Center has been around now about 11 years, and one of the things we understood is that you can learn quite a bit in that amount of time. And what we wanted to do more recently is actually as of this fall, is expand our focus in talking about how Vision Zero, at least in U.S. context, can really be propelled with a start and a focus on youth, where they walk and bike, and expanding from there. Time and again, we had heard communities talk about their safety programming, how it began with a school, how it began with a park or programming at a school district, and how then that spread throughout the community. So that is something, Victoria, I think I had sent it to you, but should I send that maybe through the chat feature, maybe to Jane, in terms of we have a resource related to this about how Safe Routes to School can be sort of a stepping stone for developing more robust Vision Zero programs.
Seth, you're welcome to add it to the chat function at this time if you'd like to, but we will be sharing that resource in a follow-up correspondence to all of our...
Oh, well then no need to bombard folks, right? Okay. Yeah. Well, that's pretty much where we are right now, and we're working really actively as part of the University Transportation Center we have here at the Highway Safety Research Center. We're working with cities right now to figure out how they got started. In fact, we talked to Anna earlier as part of this project, how they got started and how Vision Zero is sort of unfolding in social and political ways. It's pretty fascinating work, but we're learning that beginning with children in schools is a really good idea for most places.
If I can add one example, a few years ago, California passed a law that allowed jurisdictions to lower the speed limit to 15 miles per hour around schools. Mm-hmm. And we took that opportunity in San Francisco to apply it to all schools in our city, public, parochial, and private. So we have some significant zones in our city now that have reduced speeds, and that allows for a lot of other initiatives, particularly if it's at 15 miles an hour. The Transportation Department is allowed to put other treatments in because the speed limit has now been lowered. So that's an example of using youth in schools as an opportunity to propel safety for all.
Thank you for that, Anna. That nailed it. Yes, that's exactly what you've articulated so beautifully. That's exactly what we're seeing in places like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, out in San Francisco for sure, LA. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how that can impact and really catalyze efforts around safety.
Yes, and I'll just add, this is Victoria, that I really do think that an additional webinar or training on this topic is warranted, and you know, we'd love to continue to work with you guys on as you have more findings, Seth, and Anna's, you know, as you and your partners are available, we would love to be able to feature that more, because we do think that there's a lot of leveraging that that's happening, and that can be shared with the rest of the state. I'm going to move us on to some of the other questions that are coming in through the chat box, so this question, I'll just pose it to both of you. Can you give some advice about how to evaluate, let's go back up, evaluate the effectiveness or impact of bicycle rodeos in particular? So one particular strategy. Is that something that either of you can kind of weigh in on? I know that the tallies that we've been working on are address the larger picture, but do you either offer additional advice about other kinds of evaluation tools for activity-specific programs?
Mm-hmm. Anna, I don't know if you want to go first, or
I am looking up a resource I just typed up earlier this week. We have a partner in our city for our partnership that does this, and they actually do measure, for bike rodeos, they do so how many students come and how many were new learners, and out of the new learners, how many successfully were able to learn to ride a bike by the end of the bike rodeo, and the number of bike helmets distributed. The bike rodeos are a fairly short time period, so you can't go into too deep in an evaluation and serve the children all at the same time, but those are the measures they collect at each bike rodeo.
That's really interesting, yeah. If you wanted to really get at the heart of whether or not it's had an impact, which I think you'd have to do it pretty frequently, probably once a month at least, but you could do what a traditional kind of between and within study. Basically, it involves having schools that do the bike safety clinics and some schools that do not, and then doing before and after, maybe travel tallies to see if biking went up. Alternatively, you could use maybe observation about how kids are getting to school. You can look at outcomes like what proportion of biking kids are wearing helmets, things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, if you're really interested in doing something like this, we can always talk offline as well.
Great. That's perfect. And Seth, I think your phone might be having some trouble. We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, is that right? I apologize. How am I coming through now?
That sounds much better. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. Yes, and to the person who asked that question, the Active Transportation Resource Center, we will take your question. We can follow up with you offline as well. We can work with Seth and Anna on some resources that might be useful for you. And then I do think that Seth alluded to a study by Nora McDonald earlier on about different ways to look at, how safe routes to school programming can impact walking and bicycling rates, and how a comprehensive approach can really lead to, significant increases. And I think that, we can share a lot of what we know from the literature with you, and hopefully from that you can get what you need to do your work at the local level. Let's see, for Seth, we probably only have time for about 2 more questions before we can do our wrap-up, but what we'll do is take all of the questions that are now rolling in and make sure that we get them to our presenters today, so that they can follow up offline. But I think we'll do one, actually now that I've been speaking, I'll do one more question. Sorry about that. Seth, what are some key resources, e.g. peer-reviewed journal articles or guides from the National Center related to considerations you mentioned at the end of your presentation to help guide those different evaluation processes?
Very good. Well, we have an evaluation guide. I think it's actually titled that, certainly that at the National Center. Yeah, I think this is more of a question for offline. I do have some ideas, but certainly nothing I can really articulate too readily on the phone. But there are some good papers out there about how you would go about just setting up a good data collection and monitoring program.
I think that's about, yeah, and I agree. It's probably something that we can get into a little more depth offline, and probably would be beneficial to maybe all the participants. So, so we'll follow up on that question offline. Is there, Jane, do you see one short question that we could answer at this point? I do.
The use of and benefits of comparison or control groups.
Yeah, I think let's say that one as well. I'm looking at our time. We have about 1 minute till 11 o'clock. So what I'd like to do is have us switch back to the next slide and start with the wrap-up. As we said earlier, we will take all of the questions that are rolling in and get back to each of you offline. In follow-up, we would like to have your feedback about this webinar, so look out for a survey that we'll be emailing to all of you later this afternoon. It also allows you to ask additional questions or let us know about assistance that you might need with your Safe Routes to School or Active Transportation program. Next slide. This is the contact information for our wonderful speakers, Seth and Anna. I want to thank you again for sharing all of your expertise and wisdom with our audience this morning. And
thank you, Victoria. And thank you, Jane.
Great, thanks. And then the next slide. And just as a reminder, the Active Transportation Resource Center is here to help you. We have a list of our our contacts for each of the Caltrans districts, local assistance districts across California. This map is updated as of today. And for those of you that are familiar with our staff here, you'll notice that our colleague Kristen Hawkham's name is no longer on this map, and we do know that she will be moving on to greener pastures. We want to thank her for her expertise and her friendship for many years. She's been a tremendous asset to the ATRC, but we know she'll be moving on, so we wish her and her family the best. In her absence, our colleague Mary Strode will be covering districts 8, 11, and 12, but we will be probably updating that assignment map as well in the near future. And then our final slide is just another thank you. So thank you to everyone. I hope that this webinar was beneficial, and I wish you a wonderful Friday and weekend ahead, and thank you again for your attendance. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.